Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Stephen Roberts. I'm the Land Use and Transportation Director. I want to just take a quick second to just thank you all for coming and joining us today. We really appreciate hearing directly from you how things are going with our services. We're in this interesting role of being both a regulator, but also a customer service agency. So we're really trying to focus on doing both of those things well. So we always want to hear your feedback and appreciate you coming and letting us share a little bit about what's going on with us. And then we look forward to some time afterwards so that we can just network informally, catch up on things that may be going on with you, and help us to figure out what our areas of focus should be, things that we can. So with that, I'm going to introduce Aaron Wardell, who's our Assistant Director and still our Acting Planning and Development Services Manager, to come up and just talk a little bit more about the forum today. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Development Forum. So if you haven't been here before, we always show these first two slides to remind everybody of our purpose here today. So really the purpose of this is an opportunity to meet each other and network and learn from our customers and have an opportunity to meet some of the staff who you may deal with over email and the phone. We really do want to learn more about how we can better support your needs. So for today's agenda, we've already gone through welcome and introductions and the purpose. We are going to talk a little bit about some staffing updates here in the department. We're going to talk about some of our customer improvement and process improvements that we've been making. We are going to talk about a few regulatory changes. So we're going to talk about some updates to our parking regulations that are mandated by the state and our significant natural resources update, which will actually be the bulk of the agenda today. And then we'll have a wrap-up opportunity for networking. If you didn't already grab snacks and coffee, feel free to run back at any time and do that. So I want to mention a couple of new staff. We have more new staff within the department, but these are some of the staff members that you in the development community may have the opportunity to interact with. And so we have Allison Armstrong, who's a new plans examiner. Noah Ling is an engineering associate who will be handling facility permit reviews. Tony Mills is an associate planner doing transportation development review, and Tony's in the back of the room, actually. So Tony, wave. So you'll be talking to Tony when you're going through transportation development review processes. And then we have another Tony who will be starting as an inspector too to support our grading team. And we know that the grading team has been a little bit short-staffed and has sometimes had a difficult time getting out in the field as much as they want to be able to look at things. And so we're really looking forward to having Tony start and be able to spend a lot of time out in the field doing some of that work. We have quite a few job postings for the whole department right now. And so this is a list of all of the openings. If you know people out there who are looking, please send them to our website to take a look at these postings and consider applying. We are in the interview process right now for my replacement, a new planning and development services division manager, and we have a really qualified pool for that. So I'm pretty excited about that recruitment moving forward. And with that, I'm going to introduce Derek Moon, our building official, and Derek is going to talk about some of our customer service and process improvements we've been making.
Good morning, everyone. So the county's been working on process improvements for a while. We can always improve in most of the things that we do. So we're looking for ways to do it. And one of the ways that we came up with this is our customer service survey. If you have the time, it'll take less than 5 minutes. Fill it out. If you don't have the time, take the 2 minutes and just fill out number 4. Tell us what we're doing wrong. Tell us what we need help with. Any feedback that we can get from you, we're going to take it seriously because this is something that we've been working on for a while. Process improvement. So we've been doing this for a very long time. We went from paper to electronic to moving everything to the cloud. Everything is updating with everything that we're doing in the building services and land use and transportation. So I'm going to talk about just a few of these that are important to most of you people here. The new phone tree was a way that we could track our phone calls and how we're doing with our phone calls to make sure that we're getting everyone's answers to them. So there was a time where we didn't have a voicemail, and now we do have a voicemail. And now we're just doing a better job of keeping track and tracking everything that's going on with. We're streamlining a lot of our workflows in Project Docs. When we first started Project Docs, it was basically an emergency because of COVID. Just get something that'll work electronically. And since that time, we've been working on doing a number of different workflows that expedite some of our plan reviews. Concurrent review is possible now, where we can have every department looking at it at the same time. There are some challenges with some sites that will not allow us to do it completely concurrently, but generally speaking, we can do it most of our plan reviews concurrently. And with that, we've always come up with a shorter workflow where it's like a quick review type of thing. Another thing that we did in our process improvement was to have a expedited plan review current planning meeting once every 2 weeks, where we can go look at the plans, take them real quick and see if they can get reviewed real fast instead of having going through the whole process. So that's part of our process improvement. Moving along with our online submittal for development review and current planning. We have updated current planning. I'm not a current planning manager, but I'm just going to give you a brief update. Most of their forms are available online, but what we're working on is an online application system, which I'm going to talk about in a moment with our building permits that we already have. And finally, Excella is our permitting system, and we're in the process of moving that whole system to the cloud, which is a pretty big lift for the county. And we're working on, the reason why it's important is it'll allow us to have the most updated software every time. So every time there's an update, it'll automatically update. So if there's been a process improvement or something that's changed with Excella, we'll know about it immediately and we'll be able to implement it immediately, allowing to help you guys get your stuff in. OAS stands for the Online Application Submittal. So everyone here has Amazon, Facebook, pretty much all those types of electronic things on your phone where you have to put in information, or if you're ordering a package to get delivered. That's what our goal is with OAS, to make it that simple to submit a building permit. It'll be simple drop downs where anyone can answer it. We tried to make it foolproof. We're still making some forms, but generally speaking, you'll get to pick a residential, commercial. Then I'll give you the options automatically go from there. Could be a electrical permit, mechanical permit, building permit. I'll let you go from there. Then you start typing in your address. So we have a GIS system tied to it. So it'll automatically start filling in the address. And for the bigger projects, this online application portal will also allow you to copy and clone permits. So if you have several houses coming in at one time, and all you have to do is fill out a primary one, then just change the address or change the lot number. So that's going to expedite your stuff. And for our side, it's going to give us direct access from what you put in will automatically be put into Excella. So instead of us having to go in and type out all this information, the majority of it's already there, and we can be able just to check it real quick and send it forward. This will also help us with reporting and tracking, because we'll know when you submitted your application, how long it's been with us, how long it's been with you, all the way to the end of the process. So this is a pretty big lift for us, and we hope to have it in place by the end of this year. I'll probably be reaching out to several of you to help me out with some testing on it to make sure everything is working correctly, but we can look forward to that end of this year. Any questions for me before I sit down?
This should also make it a lot more simple for anybody who's interested in the status of the permit status. Right?
Yes. It's very transparent from the fact that you know where it's at every place. Right now, we have that capability in PDocs, where you can just go to reports and you can pull your own report and see where your plans are at right now.
This works for both homeowners looking to do an electrical project, assuming they will get, and as well as developers building new houses.
Anyone that's going to put in an application with building services, this will help. Yes, ma'am.
So if I want to know what my neighbor's doing, because I see activity over there, I use this system to find out.
Yes, you can find out if they have pulled a permit and if the permit has been where it's at in the process. Parking regulations. Oh, one other small thing I was going to mention. We're going to start a pilot drone program next year. So that should be able to help us out with some solars, makes some inspections happen really, really quickly instead of having inspectors going up scaffoldings and looking and trying to find nailing patterns. We'll be able to use a drone to get that work done a lot quicker. Next.
Use drones to check nailing patterns?
Yes.
Oh, on the side of the building and rebar. It's a wonderful program.
We're entering the 21st century. Good morning, I'm Deami Valentine, the Principal Transportation Planner, and I thought Derek was actually going to cover parking regulations, so I wasn't prepared for this, but no, just kidding. So we wanted to provide an update. If you were here at the last forum, we noted that this was in process. You've probably tracked, and shouldn't be a surprise, an outcome of some of the climate-friendly and equitable community rulemaking that has happened as a result of a governor order back in 2020 has resulted in some substantial changes to how we can regulate parking. And so we filed an ordinance 903, and so that's available for your review. And we will actually be having a first hearing at the board on October 15th. So a lot of cities have already started to implement this. We got a little bit of an extension to apply our regulations. And so we have to have this wrapped up by the end of the year. The regulations will change how parking is provided. Developers can still provide parking, but we will not be dictating how much parking is going to be provided. So there's not going to be we're essentially repealing all parking minimums regulations, and this applies to off-street. We do have an on-street parking provision that applies to residential development in some instances. Because of the connection to the off-street parking, we're also repealing that element of our code as well. We are applying, and some may be interested in terms of when parking is provided, how that parking can be developed, and specifically for parking lots that are greater than a half acre in size. So that's about 40 to 60 parking spots in general. So that's probably applies to more commercial developments. But we would regulate kind of how those parking lots are mitigating for, in this case, mostly like the urban heat island effect. So requiring some tree canopy provisions. So we have right now 40% tree canopy provision that's required for anything over 0.5 acres. We're also required to establish parking maximums. So how much parking can be provided will be regulated. And this is similar. We've had these provisions in the metro area for a number of years. They were more closely aligned with where transit was available, so proximity to transit. And we're applying that broadly across the urban unincorporated area. And I should note, this doesn't affect any of the rural area. It's just inside the urban growth boundary. And then we also have new minimum accessibility requirements for ADA parking. So there will be some standards in place because those have typically been tied to, they're more guided by the building code and tied to when parking is made available. We recognize that if parking is not made available, we should still be providing those provisions and making sure that there's still accessibility considerations in place. And so we have specific, more large development applications for that. So that is a high-level overview of our new parking regulations. Happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if there's no transit available within like a mile of planned development, they still don't have.
That is correct. Yeah, we are actually currently applying directly the state rate requirements that prevent us from applying parking standards within proximity to transit. So there is that connection. And so we're applying this now throughout the county, throughout urban unincorporated Washington County. So there isn't that direct tie. We don't anticipate that developers will take advantage of that necessarily, but we'll see how it manifests.
So you're saying there was an option to apply access to transit to your regulations?
There were a couple options that were available to us to pursue. It would have entailed, if we were tailoring the parking regulations a little bit more, it would have required us to implement provisions that were we weren't really, from a structural standpoint, in a position to set up. For example, like start charging for parking, on-street parking. There would have been more levels of service that the county just doesn't have the structure for.
Jurisdictions within Washington County are using those provisions?
Most everybody has gone the same path that we've gone, which is just removing the park minimums. But I do know the city of Sherwood has tried to tailor their regulations a little bit more and considering some of these other options.
If anybody's interested in more detail about this, if you search the county website for the board agendas, or board of commissioner agendas, the staff report and the actual ordinance language are posted for the October 15th meeting. So if you want to learn more, that's a good place.
Yeah, I don't want to take up all the time. And CJ Doxey in the back here is the staff resident expert who is shepherding that ordinance through. He'll be hanging out and happy to answer questions afterwards. All right, thanks. And I'll pretend I'm going to do the SNR. So now to significant natural resources. Teresa.
Thanks, Tammy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Teresa Cherniak, Principal Planner with Community Planning. So we've been here a couple times to talk about, excuse me, the county's work on our Significant Natural Resources Program. And we're finally coming to the point of adoption. So we wanted to circle back and talk about where we are right now, in case you haven't been tracking it. So a little bit of an overview. There were some state law changes in 2017 that resulted in legal challenges to the county's regulations about significant natural resources. And when I'm talking significant natural resources, that's primarily what we call riparian wildlife habitat, which is areas that are usually inundated with water, so creeks, streams, that sort of thing, wetlands. And then the upland area, which is typically literally upland from that water area. It'll have vegetation, trees, that sort of thing. And those areas are really valuable for wildlife. And so we have had regulations on the books for a long time. Those were the ones that have been challenged. And so we've been working both on updating our mapping, since that was quite old, and then updating our regulations to meet state law requirements. We've been focusing also just on the urban unincorporated area, so not the rural area and not areas within cities. So cities have their own regulations. So right now we are moving toward two ordinances, or moving forward with two ordinances. One has more to do with our policy side of things in our comprehensive plan and our community plans. And then the other 902 is about amending our regulations and our community development code. So the first one, the policy changes. There is just one policy right now that deals with natural resources. So we are amending that and the implementing strategies in there. It kind of lays out what our new program is going to be. So the idea is particularly for upland that we're balancing protection of trees as a proxy for the habitat. And balancing that with the need to provide land for economic development, housing, that sort of thing. We need to have a clear and objective path, and if you've been following our ordinances, we've talked a lot about that. Clear and objective is what state law requires for our regulations, and that's what we were found to be out of compliance with. We're also clarifying that the program that we'll be relying on now is really looking at the regulations in the Community Development Code as the place for developers to look at what are the standards for community members, to see what are the standards that affect development. They're no longer going to be in the community plans. As far as the community plan changes, most of our community plans were done in the early 80s. And actually a lot of area has been annexed to cities over time. And we still had a lot of policies about natural resources for areas that we no longer regulated. So we were taking those policies out. We were also removing all of the subjective design elements. Each of the community plans has a number of design elements that at this point, when you come in for a development application, we will look at the community plans and talk about how your development matches that. Most of those are subjective, and we can't apply subjective standards to development. So we're removing the elements that aren't clear and objective. And any that are in there that are kind of giving policy guidance, that's what they are, is policy guidance. They're not actual requirements. And then we did make it clear in each of the community plans, the whole process that we just went through, so that in the future, people will have that readily available in the plans. The other big thing that we are changing in each of the community plans is the significant natural and cultural resources maps. They look like similar to this. This is the Bethany area. And so this, we've combined actually the metro and the county's old categories. So we'll now just have two categories. It's riparian wildlife habitat and upland wildlife habitat. Those are shown now in each of the community plan maps. And in the past, that hasn't been available on the outward facing intermap that the county has, but that will be available. So if, again, community members or development applicants can now look, will be able to look once this is passed on our intermap, and be able to see on your site exactly where we have mapped the resources. It's still a general idea of where the resources are. So still through the development review, that will need to be finalized. But this is giving the general idea. And now onto the regulations. So the Community Development Code standards for significant natural resources, the big thing that we need to do is to make sure they're clear and objective. There is a statewide planning goal, that's goal 5, and then metro requirements in Title 13 that we have to follow. And those are both kind of process items and substantive requirements. As I said, we're not changing the rural area requirements, so the focus really is on the urban area. And the idea is really to provide an appropriate level of protection for the resources, but also balance that with continued economic use. And particularly within the urban growth boundary, that's really the charge we've been given. So for riparian areas, the proposed regulations are really similar to what is currently required. Development is strictly to moderately limited. Some development activities are allowed. Most of those are ones that are allowed by Clean Water Services because they really are regulating what happens in these areas. And then there's certain types of activities that are allowed. public transportation and utilities, wildlife viewing areas, CWS approved creek bank restoration, that sort of thing. And then every property is allowed at least one single dwelling or middle housing duplex, so that if a site was completely covered by riparian, you would still be able to do at least have some economic use of your property. Let's see, for upland wildlife habitat, this is really where we've changed things quite a bit. The proposed regulations, they don't change the allowed uses on property, so development is allowed. But the focus is on trees and retaining or replacing a certain percentage of trees within the mapped upland wildlife habitat area. So what we've done is provide a clear and objective path to doing this. It relies on a tree inventory, assigning points to the trees based on size and type of tree, and if you're one of specific 3 species that were considered particularly important. So oaks, the native oak, madrones, and Willamette Valley ponderosa pine. Those have a little bit more points. And so we've got then, you do an inventory, you get the number of points that all of your trees add up to, and then you need to preserve or replace at least 50% of those. There are 2 alternative discretionary paths, and state law allows us to do that as long as we have a clear and objective path. And so those focus on tree canopy and then on an environmental report. So the idea was to give some flexibility if the tree point process was just not possible for a site, that there are some other options that maintain a similar level of protection, but provide some flexibility for a site. And Metro requirements do, Metro does require us to have more protection for areas that came into the urban growth boundary after 2005. So you'll see in the regulations that there is a higher tree percentage point requirement for those areas that came into the UGB after 2005. So we did go to the Planning Commission. We had a number of meetings with them, work sessions, and then 3 hearings. A lot of testimony from a lot of folks, both property owners that were newly finding out that they had resources on their property. A lot of community members that are interested in environmental protection. We did hear from the development community, so quite robust discussions. And the Planning Commission did recommend some changes that provide a little bit more relief for small infill projects inside the urban growth boundary. So we then went to the board on October 1st, so just last week, and they did direct us to make some changes to both of the ordinances. That's called engrossment in the county's process. So for Ordinance 901, we are making some changes to the maps that people requested before August 31st that are consistent with the methodology that we used to develop our original maps. And then Ordinance 902 is including some amendments, again, to make it a bit easier for infill projects. Not exactly what the Planning Commission had asked for, but some similar changes. We're also looking at doing some more work on monitoring and enforcement. We recognize that was a little less sorted out through the ordinance. So over the next year, we'll plan to do more work on how monitoring and enforcement might work and come back to the board. So what happens now? There are 2 more hearings. That's the county's process, one's a day, one's at night. So we should have adoption of the ordinances on November 5th, and they would be then effective on December 5th. And at that time, the enforcement order and the stay on development within wildlife habitat should be able to be lifted. And people on December 5th should be able to start making applications again for those sites. We'll have new application materials, and like I said, the online natural resource map will be available as soon as possible after adoption. We do use MuniCode, and this is a large couple ordinances, so that will take a little bit of time to get online. So people will need to use the actual ordinance language. We'll have that posted in MuniCode until it gets changed throughout our code. And with that, I will stop and see if people have any questions.
Does the mapping get validated when a development application is submitted? Yeah, the mapping is like better than it was, but it's still in personal case not perfect. And so when a development application is submitted, will there be a delineation that supersedes the mapping? Right.
So the delineation will happen for the vegetated corridor, and that'll be through either the Clean Water Services process, or we have a methodology in the code for how that happens. The rest of the area is still going to be then upland wildlife habitat. However, if there are no trees, then the regulations won't apply, because the regulations are all about the native trees within that area. So we don't expect that we'll update the mapping for each development project, but as applied, you will need to map where the trees are, and then apply the regulations in that way. If someone really does want the map changed, there is a process in the code for that. We know, like for middle housing, the map needs to reflect the actuality, and so we do expect that people will want that, particularly for that situation, and there is a process that we have. Other questions? Great. Thank you.
If you do end up with questions later, you can always follow up with Teresa and the team working on that. So we're at the questions point for the overall presentation, or anything people would like to ask at this point. Or we can just have more snacks. That's fine too. Okay, well, we have many staff in the room right now. So if you have questions for any of us, we're here to answer those. We have information available in the back. And then go ahead and mark April 10th on your calendar. That will be our next development forum. Looking forward to seeing you all back here for that one.